The summer sun was merciless, beating down on the sprawling acres of Red Rock Ranch until the earth cracked in thin, jagged lines. Dust floated lazily in the air, disturbed only by the thunder of hooves pounding across the corral. Caleb Thornton didn't slow his horse. He never did. People said he was born in a saddle, half man, half Mustang, but what they really meant was that he wasn't built for stopping. Not in business, not in arguments, and certainly not for anyone who dared to tell him no. He was the owner of the largest cattle operation in the county, worth more than every other ranch in the region combined. And everyone knew it. They also knew he was as stubborn as the bulls he bred. So when he rode into the yard that morning, shirt clinging to his back, jaw set like carved stone, the ranch hands kept their eyes down. Caleb wasn't the type you greeted with a smile unless you wanted it wiped clean off your face. Except her. Elena Dawson was crouched by the old water trough. Sleeves rolled up, hair pulled into a loose braid that the heat had already started to unravel. She didn't look up right away. She was too busy tending to a trembling calf that had been born the night before, brushing its matted fur with slow, deliberate care. She didn't belong here. At least that's what everyone whispered when she first showed up 3 months ago with a duffel bag, a resume that barely filled half a page, and a request for work. But Caleb's foreman, Sam, had vouched for her. And that was enough to keep her on. Barely. Her job wasn't glamorous, feeding the chickens, mucking out stalls, checking the goats for ticks, but she worked until the sun dropped and her hands ached. No one could say she didn't earn her keep. Still, she kept to herself except with the animals. With them, she was soft-spoken, patient. It was the only time Caleb ever caught her smiling. When his shadow stretched over her, she finally glanced up. "You're blocking the light," she said, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" She stood brushing dust from her knees. "The calf spooks easily. If you're going to stand there like some mountain, at least move to the side." It wasn't often that people talked to him like that. It was even rarer that they survived it. He stepped closer, close enough to see the freckles scattered across her sunburnt cheeks. "Do you always give orders to the man who signs your paycheck?" "Only when he's in the way," she said, calm as if she didn't just shove a stick in the hornet's nest. A muscle in his jaw twitched, and then, without a word, he moved. That night, Caleb found himself thinking about her when he should have been reading the feed inventory. He didn't like it. Not one damn bit. She was just an employee, a temporary one at that. But there was something about the way she looked at him, like she wasn't afraid to see past the money, past the name, straight into the man who hated being still. 3 days later, trouble came. The summer drought had stretched too long. And one of the far pastures had been left vulnerable. Coyotes had gotten bold, slipping under the fence line in the dead of night. By morning, they'd taken 2 lambs. Caleb was already saddled up when Elena rode in from the north side, her hair wild from the wind, her shirt streaked with dirt and blood, not her own. In front of her, nestled in a makeshift sling, was a newborn goat, barely alive, bleeding softly. "Fence is down," she said before he could ask. "Coyotes are circling. This one's mother didn't make it." Something in Caleb's chest shifted. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them. Steady, controlled, like she'd been here before, fighting to save something fragile. While the world tore at its edges, he reached out to take the goat, but she shook her head. "I've got him." And she did. That night, after the vet left, Caleb found her in the small barn, sitting cross-legged in the straw, bottle feeding the tiny survivor. The lantern light caught in her hair, turning the loose strands into copper flames. "You should be in the bunkhouse," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "And leave him alone." "Not a chance." You're making this job harder than it needs to be. Finally, her gaze met his. Sometimes harder is the only way it's worth doing. He didn't have an answer for that. By the end of the week, word had spread that Caleb Thornton, ranch king, heartless son of a gun, had been seen in the small barn at dawn, watching a red-headed woman feed a goat. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't care what they whispered. The days that followed were restless. The air itself felt toted wire stretched to breaking. Coyotes had become bolder, slinking in closer to the ranch buildings at night, their cries slicing through the darkness like broken glass. Caleb didn't trust fences anymore, not after seeing how easily they were breached. Every evening he made his rounds, patrolling the perimeter on horseback, rifle strapped to his saddle. And every evening, without fail, he caught sight of Elena in the small barn, sitting with the rescued goat she'd named Lucky. She wasn't just keeping it alive. She was coaxing it to trust again. And damn it all, he found himself stopping just to watch her hands, small, calloused, steady, work the bottle into the kid's mouth, her lips moving with words too soft for him to hear. One night, when the moon was a thin silver hook over the horizon, Caleb's patrol brought him near the north pasture. That's when he saw it. The fence had been chewed through again. He leaned forward in the saddle, heart-thudding, scanning the shadows. A low growl rumbled from somewhere ahead, followed by a rustle in the dry grass. Son of a... Before he could swing his rifle into position, a flashlight beam sliced across the dark. Elena, he barked. Her voice came back sharp and low. Keep it down. You'll spook them. She was crouched 20 feet away, holding a long stick in one hand, the other shielding Lucky, who, God help them, had wandered out after her. What the hell are you doing out here? Caleb hissed, sliding off his horse. Saving your stock, she shot back as if the answer was obvious. You were busy somewhere else, so a shadow darted across the ground, fast and silent. Caleb didn't think. He raised the rifle, fired once. The coyote yelped, then bolted into the scrub. Elena spun toward him, fury sparking in her eyes. You could have hit me, and you could have been ripped apart. They stood there, breathing hard, the smell of gunpowder clinging to the air between them. Finally, Caleb stepped closer, voice dropping. You don't come out here alone again, ever. You hear me? Her jaw tightened. I don't take orders well. You're on my land, he said, leaning in until his shadow swallowed hers. And when it comes to keeping you alive, I don't give a damn how well you take orders. You'll follow them. Something flickered across her face. Fear maybe, but not the kind he expected. This wasn't fear of him. This was something deeper, older. The kind that settled in when someone realized they'd been cared about against their will. That night, Elena didn't go back to the bunkhouse. Caleb found her in the kitchen at dawn, barefoot, making coffee as if she'd lived there for years. I figured someone had to make it, she said, pouring him a cup without asking. He accepted it, though he didn't miss the way her hands trembled when she set it down. The coyote problem didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. A storm rolled in from the west one evening, all black clouds and low thunder. It was the kind of weather that sent predators into a frenzy. They knew the wind and rain would cover their movements. By nightfall, the power was out. Caleb lit oil lamps and checked the rifle, ready for another long watch. But before he could step outside, Elena appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from her braid, her shirt plastered to her skin. They're here, she said, chest heaving. 3 of them. South pasture. The fight that followed was chaos. Rain turned the ground to slick mud, and the wind tore through the trees, carrying the coyotes' yips in every direction. Caleb shot one, scared off another, but the third, bigger, meaner, lunged straight at Elena before he could aim. She swung her stick with all her strength, catching it across the snout. It yelped, stumbled, then disappeared into the darkness. Caleb was at her side in seconds, grabbing her shoulders, eyes scanning her for wounds. "I'm fine," she said breathlessly. "You're soaked, shaking, and you nearly got mauled," he growled. "Still fine," she insisted. He didn't let go. When they made it back to the house, both dripping rainwater, he shoved a blanket around her shoulders and lit the fire in the hearth. She tried to protest, but he ignored her, crouching low so his eyes met hers. "You scare me," he said quietly. Her brow furrowed. "I thought nothing scared you." "Yeah," he muttered, looking away. So did I. They stayed there in silence, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling between them. Something had shifted tonight, not just in how he saw her, but in how she let him see her. And Caleb knew deep down that shift was going to cost him something. Something big. Morning broke slow and gray. The air thick with the damp scent of wet earth. The storm had ripped branches from the cottonwoods, scattered debris across the pastures, and left deep rivulets carved into the mud. Caleb was already outside when Elena emerged from the house, the blanket from the night before still draped over her shoulders. She looked pale, shadows under her eyes, but her jaw was set in that stubborn way he was learning to recognize. "Fence is down on the south line," he said, tossing a coil of fresh wire into the back of the truck. "If we don't fix it today, we'll be inviting trouble." She stepped toward him, clutching the blanket tighter. "Then let's get to it. You're staying here." Her head snapped up. "The hell I am, Elena. I'm not one of your ranch hands you can order around. Besides," she said, eyes narrowing, "I was the one who found the breach last night. You'd have lost stock if I hadn't been out there." Caleb bit back his first response. She wasn't wrong. And damn it, he couldn't decide if her defiance infuriated him or lit something warm in his chest. Maybe both. They worked in near silence, the metallic clang of the hammer and the low hum of wind in the grass filling the air between them. Every so often, he caught her looking toward the far ridge, eyes narrowed as if she sensed something. By the time they finished, the sun was high enough to burn through the clouds. Caleb straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and that's when he saw it. Just beyond the ridge, a dark shape moving. Not a coyote, bigger. "Elena," he said, low. "Get in the truck." "What is it now?" She hesitated, scanning the ridge. Then her breath caught. "That's a cougar." They kept their eyes on the slope as they backed toward the truck. The cougar didn't move, just crouched there, watching them with that predator stillness that made the skin prickle at the back of your neck. When they reached the cab, Caleb swung the rifle off the rack. "Get inside," he told her. "And you?" "I'll scare it off." She didn't argue this time. The door slammed and Caleb took aim, firing a shot into the dirt near the animal. The crack echoed across the pasture. The cougar flinched, then melted into the tree-lion, silent as smoke. When Caleb climbed in beside her, she was gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her voice was shaky. "I've seen them before, but not that close." Back at the ranch, the tension lingered. Caleb fixed the latch on the goat pen while Elena fetched water, but neither spoke much. The air between them felt heavier now, threaded with something neither wanted to name. By late afternoon, he found her in the barn brushing down one of the maras. She didn't look up when he stepped inside. "You could have been hurt today," he said. She set the brush aside, turning to face him. "So could you." "That's different." "Why?" "Because," he hesitated, running a hand over his jaw. "Because I know what I'm doing out there." Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Maybe I do, too, Caleb." That night, the wind died and the stars came out, scattered across the dark like spilled salt. Caleb sat on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand when he heard the soft creak of the screen door. Elena stepped out, wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her jeans. "Couldn't sleep," she said, settling into the chair beside him. They sat there in companionable silence for a while, listening to the faint rustle of the grass. Then she spoke, voice low. "When I was 12, my father left. No note, no explanation. Just gone. I guess I learned then not to expect anyone to stay." Caleb stared into his glass. He didn't know why she was telling him this now, but he felt the weight of it. "I'm not your father," he said finally. "I know," but something in her eyes said she wasn't sure she believed it. The following morning brought another problem, one far more dangerous than coyotes or cougars. As Caleb rode out to check the north pasture, he found fresh tire tracks cutting through the mud leading toward the equipment shed. The padlock was busted clean off. When he stepped inside, he saw exactly what was missing: the generator, a few power tools, and most concerning, 2 rifles from the locked cabinet. By the time he got back to the house, Elena was already waiting on the porch, her face pale. "There was someone outside last night," she said. "I thought it was just the wind, but did you see them?" She shook her head. "Just shadows moving near the barn." Caleb's gut tightened. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone was targeting the ranch. And if they were bold enough to come back twice, they'd be bold enough to come when people were outside. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds, Caleb loaded the rifle and handed another to Elena. "What's this for?" she asked, frowning. "In case they come back tonight." "I told you. I'm not." "This isn't a debate," he cut in, his voice harder than he meant. "If they show up, you stay in the house and you protect yourself. You understand?" She met his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Still, as darkness swallowed the fields, Caleb had the uneasy feeling that no matter how prepared they were, something was going to break before this was over. "If you want, I can move straight into Chapter 4, where the intruder's return forces Caleb and Elena into a life-or-death fight, and their feelings for each other erupt in the most unexpected moment. The ranch at night was never truly silent. Crickets sang in the grass. The barn creaked as it cooled from the day's heat. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote's lonely cry floated through the dark. But tonight, Caleb felt the quiet differently. It was sharper, heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. He stood at the living room window, the rifle resting against the wall beside him, eyes scanning the faint silver outline of the barns under the moonlight. Upstairs, Elena was in the guest room. The door cracked just enough for him to hear her footsteps pacing. He hated knowing she was scared, and he hated even more that someone had made her feel that way under his roof. It was close to midnight when he caught it. A faint glint near the equipment shed. Metal catching moonlight. Caleb's muscles went taut. He moved fast, sliding the rifle strap over his shoulder and stepping onto the porch without a sound. Halfway to the shed, he heard the crunch of boots in gravel. 2 shadows. One carried a flashlight, the other something long, too long to be a stick. A rifle. "Damn it," Caleb muttered under his breath. "Hey," he barked, stepping out from behind the water trough. The flashlight beam swung toward him, blinding for a second. Then the man holding it cursed and ducked. The second figure raised the rifle and Caleb barely had time to drop to one knee before the shot cracked the air, splintering the fence post beside him. Caleb fired back, not to hit, just to scatter them. It worked. The man with the flashlight bolted toward the tree line, the other close behind. Caleb ran a few paces after them, but stopped at the ridge. Chasing into the woods at night was suicide. When he turned back toward the house, he saw movement, Elena, standing on the porch with his backup shotgun in her hands, eyes wide but steady. "You could have been hit," she said, lowering the gun only when he was close enough for her to see he wasn't hurt. "And you could have been shot standing out here like that." His voice was sharper than he intended, more out of fear than anger. "I wasn't going to hide in the house while you—" He stepped closer, cutting her off with the low rumble of his voice. "You think I can't handle two low-end thieves? I told you to stay inside for a reason." Her chin lifted, defiant. "And I told you before, I'm not someone who stands back and watches when there's trouble." They stared at each other in the moonlight, breaths visible in the cool night air. Caleb realized then that he'd never met a woman who could make his blood run hot with anger and admiration in the same heartbeat. "Fine," he said at last, voice rough. "But next time you listen when I tell you to stay safe." "I can't," he broke off, jaw tight. "You can't what?" she asked softer now. "I can't be out there wondering if I'm about to hear you scream." The space between them felt charged, a current running from his chest to hers. Her grip on the shotgun loosened. "I'm not going to scream," she murmured. "Not unless it's for something else entirely." The words landed between them like a spark in dry grass. Caleb stepped forward before he could think better of it. Closing the gap, one hand cupping her jaw. She didn't pull back. The kiss was fierce, unplanned, born out of fear, relief, and the sharp realization that either one of them could have been gone tonight. Her hands fisted in the front of his shirt, and he pulled her closer until the shotgun clattered onto the porch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the silence felt different. "We should probably talk about this," she said, but there was a small smile tugging at her lips. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight. I'm making sure those bastards don't come back." They didn't. The rest of the night passed without incident. But Caleb didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair by the front window, rifle across his lap, while Elena dozed on the couch under a quilt. As dawn painted the horizon gold, she stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. "You didn't rest." "Didn't need to." She sat up, rubbing her arms. "You're lying." He almost smiled. "Maybe." Later that morning, they found fresh tire tracks near the south fence line. And footprints leading toward the old Miller property, a long-abandoned homestead about 3 miles away. "They're camping there," Caleb guessed. "Using it as a base to hit places around here." "Then what do we do?" He repeated, arching a brow. She crossed her arms. "Don't even start. You know I'm going with you." Caleb knew arguing would be pointless. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't really want to. By late afternoon, they were riding out toward the Miller property. Him on his black gelling her on a sturdy bay Marare. The air was crisp, the sun low, shadows stretching long over the grass. When the old house came into view, it was worse than Caleb remembered. Porch sagging, roof half collapsed, windows boarded over. Still, the faint curl of smoke from the chimney told them exactly what they needed to know. He dismounted, signaling for her to stay back. She ignored him, stepping up beside him as he approached the porch. Inside, a floorboard creaked and then voices. The old Miller house smelled of damp wood, ash, and something sour that clung to the back of the throat. Caleb kept his rifle low, but ready, his boots silent against the warped porch boards. Beside him, Elena's breathing was steady, too steady for someone who had no business being in the middle of trouble like this. From inside, the murmur of voices drifted out, muffled by the thin walls. 2 men, maybe 3. Caleb caught fragments. Sell it tonight. And nobody's going to miss a few head of cattle. His jaw tightened. Cattle rustlers and the kind who bring guns to do it. He stepped to the door, testing the knob. Unlocked. One look at Elena and he mouthed, "Stay behind me." The door swung open on squealing hinges. The first man they saw was seated at a table littered with empty beer cans, cleaning a pistol. He froze, his gaze flicking from Caleb's rifle to Elena in the doorway. The second man, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar down his jaw, stood near the fireplace. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. "Don't," Caleb warned, his voice low but carrying weight. "Who the hell are you?" Scar Jaw demanded. Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside, forcing them to back up. "You've been on my land. You've been shooting at my house." Scarred Jaw smirked. "All false bravado. Your land. Out. Here's fair game. Cowboy." The third man emerged from the back room. Then, younger Twitchy holding a hunting knife. His eyes darted between Caleb and Elena. Caleb felt the shift before it happened. The moment the air went tight, Scar Jaw's hand twitched toward his rifle. Caleb moved faster, kicking the weapon away, but the twitchy kid lunged with the knife. "Caleb." Elena's voice cut through the chaos. He pivoted just in time, the blade grazing his side before his fist connected with the kid's jaw, sending him sprawling. The first man at the table dove for his pistol, and a shot rang out. Not Caleb's. Elena stood in the doorway, his backup revolver steady in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. The man dropped his pistol and clutched his bleeding shoulder. Cursing. "Next one's not in your arm," she said, her voice shaking but deadly serious. For a second, all 3 rustlers froze, recalculating. Caleb took advantage of it, driving Scar Jaw against the wall with the barrel of his rifle pressed under the man's chin. "You've got one chance," Caleb growled. "You get off my land and you never come near it again, or I plant you right here." They left, limping, bleeding, and minus their weapons. Caleb kept his rifle trained on them until the sound of their truck faded down the dirt road. Only then did he turn back to Elena. She was pale, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. "You." He stopped, shook his head, and let out a rough laugh. "You just shot a man." Her lip trembled. "He was going to kill you." Caleb stepped forward, taking the revolver from her hand and setting it on the table. "You were damn steady for someone who's never pulled a trigger. I've never even held a gun before." Her voice cracked on the last word. That admission hit him harder than he expected. He realized she'd stepped into a gunfight for him with no real idea what she was doing and still saved his life. "You scared me," he said quietly. "Not 'cause I thought you couldn't handle it. 'Cause I realized I couldn't handle the idea of losing you." She blinked at him, stunned into silence. They left the Miller house as the last light of day faded, the air turning sharp with the coming night. Back at the ranch, Caleb stitched the shallow cut in his own side while Elena sat on the counter, refusing to let him brush off her concern. "You need proper care," she insisted. "I've had worse," he said, though his voice softened when he added, "but it's nice having someone fuss over me for once." Her cheeks warmed at that, but she didn't look away. Later, after the kitchen was cleaned up and the house quiet again, Caleb found her outside on the porch wrapped in a quilt, staring out at the moonlight fields. "You know," he said, leaning against the railing. "Most folks would have run the other way tonight." "I told you," she said. "I'm not most folks." He stepped closer, resting a hand on the railing beside hers. "No, you're not." For a long moment, they just stood there. The silence between them no longer heavy with unspoken fears, but something warmer, something dangerous in a different way. When she finally looked up at him, there was a question in her eyes. He answered it by leaning in, kissing her slower this time, without the adrenaline and urgency, just the truth of what had been building between them since the day they met. When they parted, she whispered, "So, what happens now?" He gave a half smile. Now we see if a rough-handed cowboy and a stubborn woman can make something worth holding on to." Neither of them knew yet that the real storm, the one that could break them or bind them forever, was already on the horizon. The sky over Red Rock Ranch was the color of steel, heavy with the promise of rain. Caleb stood at the fence line, hands on the rough cedar rail, watching the wind roll through the grass in long silver waves. Something in the air told him this wasn't just a storm coming. It was trouble. He heard the sound of tires crunching gravel long before the black SUV crested the ridge. It stopped just shy of the porch and 3 men stepped out. Not rustlers this time. These men wore pressed suits, their boots too clean for ranch work. The one in front removed his hat and smiled like a man who knew too much. "Mr. Hayes," he called. "We need to talk about your land." Inside, Elena was washing mugs when she caught sight of them through the kitchen window. Her chest tightened. She didn't know these men, but something in their stance, too relaxed, too sure, set off every warning bell she had. She dried her hands and stepped out onto the porch, keeping her distance. Caleb's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. "What's this about?" she asked. The lead man's gaze slid over her like she was a piece of furniture, then settled back on Caleb. "You didn't respond to our offer last month. We assumed maybe you hadn't considered the seriousness of our interest." "I considered it," Caleb said. "And I said, no, you might want to reconsider." The man nodded toward the hills. "There's oil under this land, a lot of it. Enough to make every man here a millionaire." Caleb's voice was flat. "I'm already rich enough." The man's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. "Money's not the only thing at stake. We've been authorized to move forward with or without your cooperation." That was when Caleb stepped forward, the space between them shrinking to a breath. "You try to take this land and you'll see how little I cooperate." The suits left without another word, their SUV disappearing into the distance, but the tension lingered like the charge before lightning. Elena turned to him the moment they were gone. "Oil. Caleb, what does this mean?" "It means," he said, heading toward the barn, "that my father's ghosts just came back to life." She followed, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Your father?" Caleb didn't stop until they were inside. The smell of hay and horses wrapping around them. He was approached by the same company 15 years ago. He refused them, too. Weeks later, the barn burned down. "We never proved it was them," but his voice trailed off. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Caleb barely slept, pacing the house like a caged animal. At dawn, he saddled his horse and rode the boundary lines, checking every fence post and gate. When he returned, he found Elena in the kitchen, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, kneading dough for biscuits. She looked up, read the strain in his face, and said nothing. Just handed him a mug of coffee. "You're too good to me," he muttered. "No," she said, pressing the warm mug into his hands. "I'm exactly what you need." By midday, the storm broke. Rain lashed the windows. Wind howled through the eaves. That was when Caleb heard the dogs barking, furious, frantic. He grabbed his rifle and Elena was at his heels before he could stop her. They found the front gate smashed in. Headlights cut through the rain. 2 trucks barreling up the drive. Men in dark raincoats jumped out, their boots sinking into the mud. "You've got to be kidding me," Caleb growled. One of the men shouted over the wind. We're just here to talk. Looks more like you're here to trespass. Caleb shot back. The first punch of thunder drowned out the reply, but the way one of them reached under his coat told Caleb enough. He raised the rifle, the click of the chamber echoing. Get back in your trucks. The man's smirk was his answer. A flash of movement, someone rushing the porch. Caleb caught him with the butt of the rifle, sending him sprawling in the mud. That was when the first gunshot rang out, splintering wood by Elena's head. She dove behind a barrel, heart hammering while Caleb returned fire, forcing the attackers back. The rain turned the yard into a slick mess, boots sliding, curses flying. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The trucks peeled away, tires spitting mud, disappearing into the storm. Caleb lowered the rifle slowly, scanning the yard. You hurt? He asked, his voice tight. Elena shook her head, though her hands trembled. You not a scratch. He stepped closer, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. I swear I didn't want you in the middle of this. Too late for that, she whispered. I'm in the middle of you, Caleb. Wherever you are, I'm there, too. The storm raged through the night, but inside the ranch house, something had shifted. They sat together by the fire. Silent, except for the crackle of flames, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. They'll come back. Yeah, he said, but so will we. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls. Inside, for the first time, Caleb felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd found something worth protecting more fiercely than the land itself. And if it meant fighting the whole damn world, so be it. The morning after the storm, the ranch was quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet. Broken fences, churned mud, the scent of wet earth and gunpowder lingering in the air. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded, scanning the horizon like he expected the men to come charging back any second. Elena came out behind him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one, her fingers brushing his for a second longer than necessary. He met her eyes, and she could see it there, the weariness, the fight still burning underneath. They won't stop, she said. I know. He took a slow sip. But neither will I. By mid-morning, the sheriff arrived. Sheriff Doyle was a broad-shouldered man with deep lines carved into his face from years of sun and squinting. He stepped out of his truck and surveyed the damage. Heard you had company, Doyle said. Caleb gave a humorless smile. Not the kind I wanted. Doyle shook his head. These oil boys play rough. If they can't buy you out, they'll push you until you crack. They'll break their fists before I crack, Caleb replied. Elena watched the 2 men. Her stomach tight. She knew Caleb could fight, but she also knew this wasn't just about fists or guns. This was about wearing someone down until they had nothing left to lose. That evening, she found Caleb in the barn working on the tractor like it was the only thing holding him together. She leaned against the doorway. You can't do this alone, she said. I've been doing everything alone for years, he muttered without looking up. She stepped closer, her voice soft but fierce. Not anymore. You have me. He froze, wrench in hand. Slowly, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. Something broke loose inside him. Then, something he'd kept locked down since his father's death. You don't understand, he said. If they get to me, fine. But if they hurt you, they won't, she interrupted. Because we'll fight together. The next day, a letter arrived, slipped under the ranch gate in an unmarked envelope. Caleb read it once, jaw tightening. It was an ultimatum. Sell within 48 hours or face permanent consequences. They're bluffing, Elena said. But even as she spoke, she wasn't sure she believed it. Caleb tossed the letter on the table. Well, see. That night, they didn't sleep. They took turns keeping watch, the rifle resting across Caleb's lap. The air was thick with tension, the creak of the house sounding louder than usual. And then around 3:00 a.m. headlights appeared on the far ridge. The trucks came fast, cutting their engines before rolling down the slope toward the ranch house. Figures jumped out, moving like shadows across the wet ground. Caleb handed Elena a revolver. If they get past me, you don't hesitate. Understand? Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. I understand. The first window shattered, glass spraying across the floor. Caleb fired a warning shot into the air. You picked the wrong ranch. The attackers didn't stop. One tried to climb the porch. Caleb caught him with a kick that sent him tumbling into the mud. Another made it to the barn until Elena stepped out from behind the door. Gun raised, forcing him to drop his crowbar. It was chaos, mud, rain, shouts, the deafening crack of gunfire. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until the sheriff's truck came skidding into the yard. The men scattered, some diving into the woods, others trying to make it back to their trucks. Doyle's deputies caught two, the rest disappeared into the darkness. Caleb lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Elena came to stand beside him. Her clothes soaked, hair plastered to her face. You okay? He asked. She smiled faintly. Better now. Over the next few days, the news spread fast. The oil company denied involvement, but the sheriff's investigation began to turn up threads, names, bank transfers, connections that led back to the same men who had made Caleb the offer. In town, folks started stopping by the ranch. Some brought food, others tools, all of them offering help. Caleb wasn't used to leaning on anyone, but for the first time, he didn't push them away. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the fields gold, Caleb found Elena out by the corral feeding the horses. I've been thinking, he said. She glanced at him. That sounds dangerous. He smiled just a little about us, about this place. You've made me realize it's not just land I'm fighting for. It's home. And you're part of that now. She didn't speak at first, just stepped closer until their hands touched. So what now, cowboy? Now, he said, we live. We fight when we have to. And we build something worth keeping. The wind was soft that night, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Caleb leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, Elena. God help me. I do. Her breath caught. I love you too, Caleb Hayes. Even if you are stubborn as hell. They stood there as the sky deepened to violet, the land stretching out before them. Scarred, yes, but still theirs. And for the first time in years, Caleb knew the fight was worth it because he wasn't fighting alone anymore.